Hi everyone, I'm Hyelim Chun from St. Peter's Hospital, South Korea. I'm a general practitioner working for Clinical Trial Center at the hospital. And today I'm presenting a clinical trial that we've done about a neuromodulation technique called photobiomodulation. So a little bit about Alzheimer's disease. It's a clinical state characterized by impaired cognitive functions and reduced capacity to carry out daily livings, but just not enough to deteriorate our daily life expectancy continues to increase. The prevalence continues to increase as well. The number of expected AD patients is predicted to reach 14 million by the year 2060, and along with it, the medical costs associated with AD are expected to surpass $1 trillion by the year 2050. Unfortunately, despite many years of research, few treatments have been shown to be effective. Research indicates that AD has a very long preclinical phase lasting possibly over 10 years called mild cognitive impairment, or MCI. And it is a condition of decreased cognitive performance that does not meet the criteria for dementia just yet and preserves the ability for independent living. Therefore, more and more emphasis has been placed on this special phase called MCI, and to figure out a way to prevent or even slow down the progression of dementia as well. So for a long time, the most prominent theory to explain the pathophysiology of AD was the amyloid cascade hypothesis. And it claims that the accumulation of amyloid plaques in the brain parenchyma is a causative event in the pathogenesis of AD. And however, empirical observations have cast doubt over how valid this hypothesis is. For example, amyloid plaques have been found to occur in individuals with normal cognition, and there is only a weak correlation between the density of plaques and the degree of cognitive impairment. So there are several other theories to explain this AD pathogenesis besides amyloid cascade. And the first one is the mitochondrial one, which proposes that the inherited environmental factors influence the mitochondrial function and ultimately lead to problems in the ATP production occurring in the mitochondrial membrane as to the formation of amyloid beta and tau proteins that are believed to play a critical role. Another, perhaps a more contemporary view, suggests a neuroenergetic hypothesis, which focuses not only on the function of mitochondria, but in the overall energy production in terms of glucose in the central nervous system. This theory postulates that the decreased amount of glucose crossing the BBB leads to energy deficiency stress in the CNS, which in turn leads to the formation of amyloid betas and taus, as well as the Alzheimer's progression. In support of these theories, a decreased glucose metabolism and mitochondrial activity has been noted decades before clinical symptoms of AD emerge. And furthermore, in patients with AD, their mitochondria are characterized by less oxidative phosphorylation, decreased ATP production, and increased ROS, or reactive oxygen species, telling us that the discovery of a more effective and targeted intervention for mitochondrial abnormalities in AD is of great importance in developing treatment against AD. So here is the different types of neuromodulation that are in practice right now for different neurological disorders. We talked about TDCS in the morning session. Neuromodulation techniques are indispensable tools for studying brain functions, as well as providing non-pharmacological treatment options for neurological and neuropsychiatric diseases. And not shown on this table are deep brain stimulation and epidural cortical stimulations, which are very effective in clinical settings as they demonstrate excellent spatial selectivity, but the downside is that they are invasive surgical procedures. TMS on the TMS, there's the transcranial magnetic stimulation and the transcranial electric stimulation. They're the two probably mainly established and clinical available non-invasive brain stimulation techniques, but they have limited spatial specificity, a depth penetration for targeting regional brain tissue, which leads us to our topic of interest, PBM. TPBM, or transcranial photobiomodulation, is a novel, non-invasive neuromodulation intervention with the potential to become an at-home wearable treatment for Alzheimer's disease. Its potential was first revealed back in 1968 for the use of hair growth and wound healing, but TPBM uses non-retinal exposure to specific wavelengths, specifically 800 to 1100 nanometers, either in the visible red light or the wavelength of 400 to 700 nanometers in the near-infrared radiation. So the mechanism as shown in this diagram is as follows. The light in the near-infrared light region offers superior tissue penetration, contributes to cell proliferation, growth promotion, and thus its use in hair growth and wound healing. Blue region light is suspected to exhibit effective bactericidal effect and induction of cell apoptosis at high radiation levels. TPBM with near-infrared light wavelengths at 800 to 1200 nanometers especially is thought to penetrate robustly into the cerebral cortex and has been found to act on the brain in two specific ways. The first one is by increasing mitochondrial ATP production, and secondly, by increasing regional cerebral blood flow. It's believed that the photons are absorbed by the intracellular chromophores present in the intracellular organelles within the mitochondria and only minimally dissipate as thermal energy when being penetrated. Energy in the form of light delivered through TPBM is absorbed by the mitochondrial enzyme and chromophore cytochrome C oxidase, which is shown right here, and stimulates the mitochondrial respiratory chain, which leads to increased ATP production. And this mechanism is especially relevant back to our mitochondrial dysfunction hypothesis that explains AD pathogenesis. It is also thought that the near-infrared light also improved mitochondrial activity by promoting dissociation of nitric oxide, NO, which acts as a local vasodilator, increasing regional cerebral blood flow. So animal research suggests that TPBM might exert, via its impact on mitochondria, beneficial effects on several pathophysiological mechanisms implicated in AD. And here I'm showing you the big picture question: is cognitive decline in MCI population reversible with neuromodulation? And our team wanted to know if TPBM will be effective and safe, more importantly, in MCI populations. And the investigation of efficacy and safety of daily application of TPBM was the aim of our clinical study. So we recruited 26 men and women age 55 to 90 who met the core clinical criteria for MCI due to AD defined by the NIA-AA guideline published in 2011. We recruited patients with KMMSE version 2, 23 to 27 with a CDR score of 0.5 to 0.1. And we excluded patients with other possible reasons for cognitive decline, such as Parkinson's, Huntington's, CNS infection, as well as hydrocephalus, as well as history of epilepsy, because the flickering lights might be a trigger to epilepsy. This is the device that we use. It's not commercially available just yet, but it's a wearable helmet that we handed out to each participant. They took it home, used it for at least 6 times a week. And on the forehead, targeting the dorsolateral prefrontal cortex, is the laser diodes with a wavelength of 808 nanometers with a radiance of 300 milliwatts. The primary outcome of this clinical study was the Korean version of MoCA, because it's a cognitive test designed for MCI population specifically. The secondary outcomes were the Korean version of MMSE version 2, as well as SARAD-K, which is a consortium to establish a registry for Alzheimer's disease. And the third, and more importantly, is the geriatric depression scale to eliminate depression as a source of cognitive decline in this elderly population. Here are the results. We saw, to our surprise, a statistically significant improvement in MoCA-K total score after 12 weeks of treatment. And the test was done at baseline and at week 3 to measure the pre-post numbers. And we used 2 sample t-tests as well as ANOVA, and was statistically significant. For KMMSE2, we did not see a significant result, although the positive trend was there. And similarly for Sarah Kate, we saw a positive improvement, but not enough to reach statistically significance. For geriatric depression scale, unfortunately, we did not see an improvement. We actually saw a negative trend, and I have two possible explanations for this. One is that our participants had very low depression scores to begin with, so there was not enough room for improvement, and our participant numbers were 26 and probably not enough to measure the depression changes. Here are the safety data. Only in the treatment group were reported warming sensations, dizziness, headaches, and hair dryness. Probably the hair in the forehead area absorbing the photons and thereby losing its flexibility. But all enrolled participants were able to complete 13 weeks of trial, and here we saw that it is feasible and safe for home use. So how is this study significant? It's telling us that the daily use of TPBM is safe and effective in MCI population and may be a source of treatment as well as preventative measure against progression into AD. There are limitations, again, the small sample size and the short treatment period. Other teams that have studied TPM have shown that 2 weeks is a maximum that the effects can last. So for the next clinical trial, we want to see how long the 13 weeks or how many weeks we do it, can the effect last for the participants without the use. And secondly, again, the post-treatment progression, and thirdly, the technical challenges of utilizing home wearable TPBM. The participants had to return to hospital, but we did have to make some phone calls for the elderly participants to teach them how to use the machine. And lastly, the heterogeneity of participants. Every country has different demographics, and we only use Korean population. And that skin tone and the hair color might affect how the lights are being absorbed. So future directions, we will want to see how TPBM is applicable to other aspects of MCI besides cognitive impairment, such as sleep, appetite, and GI symptoms, as well as normal aging group to see its preventative measures, and other neurological and psychiatric disorders as well, such as acute ischemic stroke and its effect in vasodilation. So here are the references, and that's all I have. Thank you so much.